What if I just believe you? 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 154 of the Shower Podcast, the podcast where I'm in Thailand and you do you. I'm your host, Chip, and we're back with this series. The recap episodes are officially over, but my vacation is not. So we have to continue with our journey through the evolution of self-improvement. And today we're stepping into a period that's sometimes painted as dark and dogmatic, but actually holds a rich, layered history of personal growth. Before we start, as usual, if you end up liking this episode, leaving a like and a subscribe really mean a lot. It's just one click, but they really make the difference. This is the world of faith, chivalry, and deep self-reflection, the medieval era. Now, when we think of the Middle Ages, what comes to mind? Castles, knights, monks in dusty libraries, sure. But behind those images lies something deeper. A time when faith shaped identity, when codes of honor guided behavior, and where personal growth was often seen as a spiritual quest. Let's start with a figure that we all know, Jesus of Nazareth. Yeah, we're going there. Whether you view him as a religious leader or a moral teacher, his messages of humility, compassion, and love reshaped human history. In texts like the Sermon on the Mount, he emphasized turning the other cheek, forgiving enemies, and caring for the poor. His teachings weren't about wealth or status, they were about transforming the heart. And whether or not people followed him, his ideas influenced how societies began to think about personal virtue and community. You could say he was one of the main podcasters of history. And as Christianity spread, it wasn't just about individual belief. It became woven into daily life. The writings of the Saint Augustine in the 4th and 5th centuries, for example, explored the struggle between our baser instincts and our higher calling. In his Confessions, Augustine reflects on his youthful indulgences and his eventual conversion, highlighting a universal theme. We stumble, we fall, but we can rise again through grace and self-awareness. It's raw, it's honest, and it resonates even today. But let's not forget that around the 7th century, a new spiritual movement was reshaping much of the world, Islam. The Prophet Muhammad's revelations in the Quran offered not just religious guidance, but also a framework for personal and communal ethics. One key concept was jihad al-nafs, or the struggle against self, a powerful reminder that personal growth isn't about fighting others, but about overcoming our own ego and shortcomings, which we also explored in our previous episode. Think of it as the original inner work, long before the term was even trendy. And it wasn't just in books or sermons. In cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Timbuktu, the Islamic Golden Age flourished, blending faith and reason. Scholars like Al-Ghazali wrote extensively on the balance between external knowledge and internal purification. His Alchemy of Happiness was basically a medieval guide to contentment and spiritual self-improvement. His message? True happiness comes not from wealth or fame, but from knowing oneself and aligning with divine wisdom. Meanwhile, in Europe, the idea of personal virtue wasn't confined to monasteries. It took on a more dramatic, even romantic form. Chivalry. The medieval knight wasn't just a warrior. He was supposed to embody ideals like honor, loyalty, and courage. Think of the Arthurian legends. Tales of knights upholding justice, defending the weak, and pursuing noble quests. Of course, real-life knights weren't always as noble as the story suggested, but their code served as an aspirational guide, kind of like an early version of personal branding. And it wasn't just the knights. Across Asia, the samurai followed a similar path with Bushido, the way of the warrior. It emphasized loyalty, honor, and self-discipline. Much like the knights, Samurais were trained not just in combat, but in the art of self-mastery. They lived by the idea that true courage was found in calmness, in clarity of mind, and in accepting death without fear. Imagine the level of self-discipline and reflection that takes. Let's not overlook the medieval mystics either. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess and polymath, blended theology, music, and natural science to explore the divine through personal revelation. Her visions and writings emphasized harmony with nature and the human capacity of spiritual insights. So, what's the common thread here? Whether it was through faith, discipline, or reflection, the medieval world invited people to look inward, to grapple with their flaws, to strive for something higher, whether that was God, honor, or truth. Sure, it wasn't always easy or fair. Societal structures were rigid and opportunities for personal growth weren't equally distributed. But the seeds of introspection and self-betterment were firmly planted. Now, we've already talked about monks, knights, and mystics. But what about the thinkers who bridged the gap between faith and reason? Enter Thomas Aquinas, a 13th century Dominican friar who played a key role in what we now call scholasticism. Imagine a world where the church was the ultimate authority on truth. Yet Aquinas dared to ask, can we use reason to understand God? His most famous work, Summa Theologica, tackled everything from ethics to metaphysics. Aquinas argued that faith and reason weren't in conflict, they were complementing each other. You could say he was one of the first to suggest that thinking deeply could enhance your spiritual journey. Aquinas wasn't alone. Across Europe, universities were emerging. In Bologna, Oxford, Paris. These weren't like the university we know today. They were more like guilds of scholars debating philosophy, law, and theology. But they created spaces where critical thinking was nurtured. The mere act of questioning, of comparing interpretations of Aristotle with church teachings, of debating the nature of virtue, this was self-improvement through intellectual rigor. It wasn't self-help in the modern sense, but it was about becoming a better thinker, a more disciplined mind. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, centers like Baghdad's House of Wisdom preserved and expanded upon ancient knowledge from Greece, Persia, and India, things we covered in the first episode. Scholars such Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, made advances in medicine, philosophy, and science. Their writings would later influence European scholars, fueling the Renaissance and sparking a revival of critical thought. Imagine being a scholar in the 12th century, poring over translation of Aristotle or Galen, realizing that understanding the world wasn't just for the elite. It was a human endeavor. And while most of the focus tends to be on men in these intellectual circles, we shouldn't forget that women were also contributing in meaningful ways, as we also cited before. For example, Hildegard of Bingen, whom we met earlier, wasn't just a mystic. She wrote on natural science and medicine, blending empirical observation with spiritual insight. And Christine de Pizan, a 15th century writer, challenged prevailing ideas about women's roles, arguing for women's education and moral agency. Her Book of the City of Ladies wasn't just a feminist text ahead of its time, it was a call for women to engage in intellectual and moral self-development. What strikes me is how this period, often labeled the Dark Ages, was actually a time of quite light, where personal growth, community responsibility, and intellectual curiosity simmered under the surface. Sure, it wasn't flashy, but it was real. People were asking, where can I live a good life? How can I be a better person? And their answers were as diverse as the cultures they came from. Some rooted in faith, others in reason, many in a mix of both. Now, let's be honest, this era wasn't without its contradictions. The same period saw inquisitions, crusades, and rigid hierarchies. Self-improvement wasn't equally accessible. It was often bound by gender, class, and religious dogma. But that tension, the push between constraint and curiosity, between dogma and reflection, set the stage for the Renaissance, where those seeds of thought would blossom into art, science, and a celebration of human potential. So, as we close today's episode, think about this. What lesson can we draw from the medieval world? Maybe it's the idea that self-improvement isn't just personal. It's connected to our communities, our values, and even our spiritual beliefs. Maybe it's the reminder that deep reflection and intellectual discipline are just as important as external achievements. Or maybe it's simply the understanding that even in times of rigidity and challenge, there's room for growth, for light, for change. Now, in our next episode, we'll explore that very idea, the Renaissance, explosion of creativity, curiosity, and confidence. It's going to be quite a journey, so I don't want to spoil you too much. And as always, if you ended up enjoying this episode, please remember that leaving a like and a subscribe really mean a lot. It's just one click, but they really make the difference. Until the next one, stay consistent, stay resilient, and see you tomorrow.